America is under siege, not from some foreign army, not from a caravan at the border, but from its own government turning its power inward on its people.
People are being killed in federal operations, and the truth is being buried under talking points. People are dying in custody. Families can't get answers. Communities are being flooded with armed raids that feel less like policing and more like occupation.
If they protest, they risk being shot. If they film it, they risk being arrested. If their faces show up in the wrong clip online, they risk losing their jobs. And in the United States, losing your job doesn't just mean losing a paycheck. It can mean losing your health care, your medication, your kids' treatment, or your home.
Corporations see all of this, and they know where their interests lie. They rely on federal contracts, tax breaks, and deregulation. They are not going to protect workers who stand in the street against everything that they believe in and the very administration that is making them richer. So ordinary Americans learn quickly. Keep your head down, keep quiet, and just try to survive.
It's a rational response to a system where immigration agents can kill a woman in the middle of a city, where local investigators get sidelined, and the first response from the White House is to blame the dead and praise the shooters.
For a year, we've watched powerful people in the United States talk about annexing Canada and liberating us from our own government. They said it on television, they said it on stages, they said it like they were doing us a favor.
When Canadians heard that, we didn't laugh. We took it as what it was, a threat. Because when a superpower talks about liberating you, they're not talking about handing you more rights. They're talking about taking control.
But if there is one thing we have learned about MAGA is that whatever they say out loud is the opposite of what they mean. While the likes of Tucker Carlson, Trump, and Joe Rogan said that we need to liberate Canada from the liberal elites, well, that's code for Canada should be liberating the American people from them.
If you live outside the US, it might be tempting to roll your eyes and say, well, they voted for this. Well, that's not really the whole story. For years, we've been asking why the American people didn't do more, why they voted for this obvious crook, convicted felon, and multiple failed business owner. But we need to actually stop blaming the Americans and start helping them because they really need our help.
It's time to turn that Liberate Canada nonsense around and put the Carlsons, Brobarts, Rogans, and Vances of this world back right at them and ask a simple question. What would it look like for the world to help liberate Americans from a movement that is willing to turn state violence on its own citizens and then blame them for what happens?
Now, before we get into the policy details, we need to talk about something basic. How power feels when you live under it. We talk to Americans all the time. A lot of them voted against Trump. A lot of them are exhausted, and a lot of them are scared. They're living in it and they don't know what to do anymore.
People outside the US often say, well, why don't they just rise up? Why don't they just do what other countries have done? Well, the truth is, the system they live in is built to make that almost impossible.
Their president is not chosen by a simple majority. Someone can lose the popular vote and still win the White House. Districts are carved up to keep the same people in office. The Senate gives tiny states the same weight as huge ones. That's the political structure in the US.
Then you add in daily life. Your job is tied to your health insurance. If you lose your job because you protested, you can lose access to medication, surgeries, your kids' treatment. You might even lose your home. Many people are carrying huge student loans, and rent is so high and wages are unstable.
And you also have police forces and federal units that are heavily militarized. We're not talking about one officer at the end of the street. We're talking about armored vehicles, tactical gear, and units that can be shifted around the country when the president decides to crack down.
Someone on social media said it perfectly. France is smaller than Texas. You can shut down Paris and send a message. The US is more than 3 times the size of the entire European Union. Trying to organize a national strike across that is not like flipping a switch.
No, so when people ask why don't Americans just fix it, part of the answer is that the system is designed to stop them. The system is designed against them. The people in charge right now know that, and they're pushing it as far as they possibly can.
One of the clearest places you see that is ICE. Immigration and Customs Enforcement was supposed to handle immigration enforcement. That's its name. Under Trump and MAGA, it has become something very dark.
Yep, federal officers are not just working at ports of entry. They're driving into cities like Minneapolis, Chicago, Los Angeles, and Portland, and they're showing up in residential streets and workplaces. They're running raids that look and feel like occupied territory to the people who live there.
When you send 2,000 federal officers into one metro area in a single sweep, you are not doing precise law enforcement. You are sending a message. You are telling the people, we can come into your community at any time and we do not need to explain ourselves at all.
We already saw where that leads. We did a whole video yesterday about the killing of Renee Nicole Good in Minneapolis, a U.S. citizen, a mother, shot by an ICE agent in her own neighborhood. The point today is that her death is not an isolated tragedy, it's part of a pattern.
Last year was the agency's deadliest year in more than 2 decades. Many people have died, disappeared, been deported, or worse, sent to El Salvador. Many of those people had no criminal conviction at all. They were asylum seekers, long-term residents, workers picked up in raids. They died of strokes, heart failure, infections, suicide, and what families describe as neglect.
You have people begging for medical help and not getting it. You have people with clear symptoms being told to wait. You have people moved around so often that their families can't even find out where they are until it's too late.
And there have been documented reports of abuse. So that is what a system looks like when it stops seeing human beings and starts seeing detainees as numbers on a spreadsheet. When you combine that with heavily armed raids in cities, you do not have a border policy. You have internal repression.
Now, pile on what happened after Renee Nicole Good was killed. We watched a Vice President of the United States, J.D. Vance, stand at the White House podium with rage in his voice, saying her death was a tragedy of her own making. He blamed her. He blamed the media. He blamed the far left. He did it while the investigation was just getting started.
Now listen, we saw the video and she was doing a 3-point turn. She was smiling and getting ready to leave the scene. And she even said, "Hey, I'm not mad at you." And as she was turning, he shot her. It wasn't until he shot that car that it revved up and took off, because she was already dead by that time. He murdered her in cold blood and then called her an effing bitch.
Kristi Noem and Donald Trump said the ICE agent was recovering at hospital. He wasn't hurt. That was total spin. He was still holding his cell phone and walking gingerly to the car after killing an innocent woman who had the right to protest and was leaving peacefully. She even waved another car through before she started backing up.
When state power kills somebody and the first instinct is to blame the person who died with no hesitation, with no let's investigate and see all the evidence, it's clear that the story is written before the facts are even in. And when you contrast that with how the same movement treats people on its own side, it becomes even clearer.
Think about Kyle Rittenhouse, 17 years old when he traveled from Illinois to Kenosha, Wisconsin, with a rifle during protests. He shot 3 people, killed 2, injured 1. A jury found him not guilty.
Politically, the reaction was very revealing. Right-wing media rolled out the red carpet. He sat for prime-time interviews. He appeared at conservative conferences. He was praised as a symbol for killing protesters. It was premeditated. He came to the protest armed. Right now, he's probably the head of an ICE unit because you know what? That's the type of bros they are recruiting.
The videos are astonishing. They're recruiting disillusioned men who have sat at home playing too many video games, who hate women and immigrants because they get the jobs that their fat asses are way too lazy to get qualified for. Now, they have guns, authority, and they get to round up, abuse, and legally kill the very people they hate.
Now set aside a woman in a family SUV on her street, unarmed, trying to drive away. She ends up shot and dead. The same people who celebrated Rittenhouse immediately calls her a terrorist.
So in this worldview, if you're on their side, you can show up at protests with a gun and end up being treated like a guest of honor. If you're on the wrong side, you can be in a car, afraid and trying to leave, and they'll mark you as a threat within hours of your death.
That is not a justice system. That is a loyalty test. The law becomes something that protects one group and crushes another. And once you accept that inside your own borders, it becomes much easier to use that same logic with overseas territories.
Which brings us back to this whole obsession with liberating other countries. Venezuela, Greenland, Cuba, even Canada somehow. We keep hearing that the US under Trump is defending freedom by sending forces abroad, grabbing foreign leaders, and threatening to take territory.
We grew up in a world where the story was America defended democracy in other places. That was never the whole truth, but it was the story. Now we are watching a government that can't even pretend to uphold democratic values at home, yet it still thinks about liberating the rest of us.
And the comparison that people are making to Pinochet's Chile or the dirty wars in Latin America is not about saying the US is identical to those regimes. But Trump certainly admires those authoritarians and has already said nobody can stop him, only his own mortality.
You see people being rounded up, you see deaths in custody, you see families left without answers, and you see leaders using that fear to tighten their grip. And Canadians are supposed to sit here and welcome talk about annexation and liberation? No way. We have every right to say, if this is how you treat your own citizens, we do not trust you with ours.
So, what would it actually mean to liberate the United States from MAGA? Not with tanks, not with occupation, with solidarity and pressure. Well, it starts with believing the people inside the country who are telling us what is happening to them. Immigrants, Black and brown communities, journalists, lawyers, organizers, nurses, teachers, people like Renee's family who are brave enough to speak even when they know the government would rather that they stayed quiet.
It means supporting the groups on the ground who document abuses, challenge them in court, and offer services to families torn apart by raids and detention. That can be donations, that can be sharing their work and amplifying it on social media. That can be paying attention to their reporting instead of just the latest dramatic quote from Trump.
For Canadians and other allies, it means holding our own leaders to a higher standard. If a politician from here happily stands next to Trump, echoes his talking points, and shrugs off what ICE is doing, they're showing you what kind of government they would be comfortable running at home.
It means keeping Canada in one piece united as a place where rights still matter. That means we defend independent media, courts, public health care, and the idea that the law applies to everyone.
And to Americans watching this who feel trapped, we want to be clear. We do not see you as the enemy. We see you as neighbors whose government has become dangerous, not just to the world, but to you.
We blame the people who looked at your system and said, how do we use this to protect ourselves and punish everybody else? We blame the politicians who decided that deaths in custody are just numbers and that a woman shot in the city can be dismissed with just a simple sentence.
If you're tired and angry and feeling alone, you know what? You're not. There are people across the border and around the world who still believe that you deserve better than this.
And to Canadians, we will say this. When you hear talk of annexation and liberation pointed north, remember what's happening south of us. Remember ICE. Remember those detention centers. Remember how quickly MAGA turns its fire onto its own people it claims to protect.
We do not need to be liberated from public health care and our own elections, thank you. What the world needs is for Americans to be free from a movement that treats state violence as a first resort and then laughs about it.
If you want to stand with the people in the USA who are trying to change that, share this video, talk about it, and support the organizations that we have linked below. And when you vote here in Canada, ask yourself, which leaders do you trust to stand up to this regime and which ones would look the other way?
The United States needs help, there's no doubt about it. Not the kind Trump talks about, the kind that comes from allies who still believe in human dignity and the rule of law.
And as long as we have this channel, we're not going to stop. We are going to keep saying all of that out loud.
So thanks for watching today. If this really struck a nerve with you, hit like, subscribe, and share this with someone who really needs to hear it.
And check out our Substack where Dave writes much angrier than the YouTube algorithm will let us show.
And if you want to support this channel, please consider joining the A-Team. It really helps us to keep making videos like this every single day. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you tomorrow.